When I had my first lucid dream, I had no idea it even had a name. Why? Because I was 5 years old and there wasn't a word for it in my world yet. All I knew for certain was, hold on a moment, this isn't real, this has to be a dream. And since that day, over 43 years ago, I've had thousands of lucid dreams. I've become one of the world's best-selling lucid dreaming authors and one of the world's best-known lucid dreaming researchers. But I want to take you back to those early beginnings so that you can learn how someone learns to lucid dream without knowing it even has a name. And because I'm as mad as a bag of fish, this is unscripted. It's going to be me reminiscing and rambling about those early days of lucid dreaming. So who knows how long this video will be? Buckle up, pop some headphones on. You don't have to watch the screen if you don't want to, but it's going to be an interesting adventure. And the point of today's video is to remind you of the simplicity at the core of lucid dream training. Maybe you're feeling a little overwhelmed with all of the acronyms, all of the techniques, all of the hours you have to spend invested in lucid dreaming. I want to take you back and remind you that if I can do it at 5 years old, so can you. How it started. So many of you will already know this part of the story if you've watched my other videos or read my books. But basically, back when I was 5 years old, I used to have terrible parasomnias, nightmares, sleepwalking, all that kind of nasty stuff that makes a child fear sleeping. So, with my child brain, I decided I have to fix this. I can't go on like this, because frankly, I was terrified of going to bed. So I decided to try to catch the moment I fell asleep. That was my first lucid dreaming technique, and it's where my entire childhood lucid dreaming practice began. And that's what I really want to get into today. Remember, I didn't know lucid dreaming had a name. I didn't know any of the things you had to do to have lucid dreams. There were no lucid dreaming techniques in my world. I was just this random little boy on a planet having nightmares who needed to fix them quickly. Lucid dreaming without a guide. So I was this little kid without a guide. There was no one there to tell me, you should keep a dream journal, you should perform reality checks, you should work on your prospective memory, you should engage critical thinking. There was none of that. I was a little boy with a little boy's brain, terrified of sleep, because sleep meant the demons would come and I'd spend my nights running, scared, screaming. So what does this tell us? Well, I suppose the first lesson is kind of obvious. Motivation is important, and trying to escape the demons is pretty strong motivation for a little boy. So, when you're motivated for lucid dreaming, you start to think about your dreams in a different way, which is exactly what I did. Now, obviously, at 5 years old, you have a lot of free time, a lot of time to think and daydream and to imagine. So I could spend much of my day thinking about my dreams. I was motivated to learn how to unlock that doorway into the other world. But it also tells us something more fundamental. All of the lucid dreaming techniques you know, all of the practices, all of the terminology, all of that isn't really necessary. When you have the right way of thinking, the right motivation, the right mindset, you can unlock the world of lucid dreams. And we know this is absolutely true because back in 1867, a French aristocrat by the name of Marie-Jeanne Léon Lecoq de Marquis de Herve de Saint-Denis wrote the very first book on lucid dreaming, only he didn't call it lucid dreaming because lucid dreaming didn't have a name. And he also learned to lucid dream nightly purely through observation, critical thinking, and being interested in his dreams. And I think that's probably the first important lesson from today's video. I'm not saying that lucid dream training and practices are unnecessary, just you don't want to get caught up in them thinking that's the only way to do it. You don't want to become obsessed with the recipe so much that you're not tasting the food. The practices are there to get you to think in a certain way, to get you to do certain things, but you don't want them to blind you. You don't want to become so obsessed with, oh, this is the exact way to do mild, or this is the exact way to dream journal, because then you stop thinking for yourself. Then you lose that experimental, inquisitive mindset, which is at the core of this subject. So how did I go from horrific nightmares to regular lucid dreams without a guidebook? The nightmares. So let's start with the nightmares, and this is where it's going to get a little bit rambly, a little bit messy, and a little bit reminiscent, because this is back in the 1970s and early 80s, and my memories are a little bit of a mishmash of that time. Obviously, I was 5 years old. So one nightmare that really stands out, and I need to give you a bit of backstory here. I grew up in rural Dorset, and I lived at the edge of a town, right where the town finished and countryside began. And just like out of a Stephen King novel, there was a lane right by my house called Dark Lane. I know it's already loaded with creepiness. And right by my house on the other side of Dark Lane was a tree, this ancient oak tree, huge oak tree. But in my dreams, that oak tree turned sinister. It would come to life, it would grow a face, it would represent all that was mysterious and dark, and it would try to pull me out through my bedroom window into the mystery and fear of the night, and I'd be there in my bed dreaming that this is happening, obviously, with watching the branches come through my window just in absolute terror. And there were a lot of nightmares along a similar line, either running from monsters through a dark forest, or maybe a demon appearing in the crack in the doorway of my closet. Basically, it's that same fear, that same primal fear that most children have when it comes to the darkness and night. And there were more mundane, realistic nightmares, dreams about losing my parents, dreams of horrible accidents, all the kinds of worries that can crop up in a child's mind. So my first approach to tackling these nightmares head-on was to tell myself as I went to bed, I'm going to catch the moment I fall asleep, because if I know that I'm falling asleep, then I'll know that it's a dream and I won't be frightened. So what I was doing there was kind of an obvious thing to do. It was pretty straightforward, a pretty logical conclusion a child might make. But what I was actually doing was setting an intention to recognize when the dream started. But also, and fundamentally, my childhood mind recognized that the problem was that when I was dreaming, I didn't know it was a dream. So if I could catch that moment where I transitioned into dream space, I would know I was dreaming and therefore know that none of it could harm me. And that line of thinking was absolutely core to everything that came after, because what I'd done without realizing it was understood the problem I was facing. The problem was simply that human beings assume when they're dreaming that they're awake. In order to not do that, in order to have a lucid dream, in order to stop the nightmares, I had to recognize the difference between dreams and wakefulness within the dream. Lucid dreaming without techniques. So I didn't have any lucid dreaming techniques, but I did have motivation and a problem framed in the correct way. And that's what led to lucidity. So here's where we need to get into the nitty-gritty reality of a 5-year-old's brain and life. Because let's be honest, a 5-year-old can't do all of the lucid dream practices I teach you here on the channel and in my books. So what on earth was going on? Well, it boils down to that statement I just made. I had motivation and I had a problem framed correctly. And with that, I could build an active and practical lucid dream practice without even realizing I was doing it. So I often say, and I stand by it, that dream journaling is one of the most important practices you can do to induce lucid dreams. And it's absolutely true. Mary-Jeanne Leon-Lecoq de Marquis de Herbe de Saint-Denis did exactly that. But I was 5 years old and I could barely write. I could write a few words and I could scribble some very bad sketches. But that's exactly what I did. You see, the point of dream journaling isn't to have a perfect record of your dreams. It's to care about your dreams and to understand your dreams and to recognize the patterns in your dreams. So, my dream journals at 5 barely existed physically, but they existed mentally. I spent large portions of my day as a child thinking about what I'd been dreaming about, trying to understand why I dreamt them, trying to recognize patterns. I wasn't thinking in those terms, obviously, but that's what my brain was doing. It was mulling over those kinds of principles. And realistically, it probably went something like this. Last night I had a dream about the scary tree. If I see the scary tree again, it must be a dream. Something as simple as that, a thought like that in a 5-year-old's brain. What I was doing without realizing it was playing interdimensional spot the difference. I was recognizing the patterns and emotions in my dreams, mostly fear, and then I was applying that when I was awake. I was recognizing, oh yeah, I dream about this often. I feel like this often. So I need to be prepared. If I feel like that, or think like that, or see that thing, then I'm probably dreaming. I need to really recognize that when that happens, which is also essentially what the practice of reality checks boils down to. This wasn't structured or systematic or following a recipe. It was organic and fluid and intuitive and observant. My child's brain had stumbled without realizing it onto the entire practice of lucid dreaming in a very simple way, but it worked. Because the more I thought about my dreams, the more I understood them, and the more I understood them, the more I could train my mind, inadvertently, to recognize things that were similar, and to realize that when those similar things happened, the probability was that I might be dreaming. I was basically just being prepared, like the Boy Scouts say, be prepared. And this is what I mean and others mean when they talk about metacognition. It's thinking about how you think. That includes both dreams and waking life, because you've realized you're not very good distinguishing between the two. So you start to think about how you think, and you start to play spot the difference when you realize that your dreams have a tendency towards certain things. And that, in a nutshell, was pretty much my childhood lucid dream practice until I eventually, in my teenage years, realized there was a lot more research into this. But it worked. I was using prospective memory by setting that intention during the night, but also during the daytime, I was investing my mental energy into watching my own thoughts and understanding my dreams. And frankly, there's a tendency to think, well, that sounds pretty boring and simple, so lucid dreaming techniques, modern lucid dreaming techniques must be better because they have names and structure, but no. Modern techniques are just a way to make your brain orientate itself towards that way of thinking. That's what all of these techniques and practices do, one way or the other, is they orientate your mind to the same thing my childhood brain was doing. My first lucid dream. And this is where the video is going to take a bit of a frustrating turn, but get used to frustration. It's part and parcel of lucid dream practice. It's built in. But because this is so long ago, I can't tell you with absolute certainty what my first lucid dream was, because many of the early lucid dreams were around a similar theme. But I can tell you one that I can remember pretty darn clearly, and that was what we would now call a false awakening. So it was the middle of the night, and I thought I'd woken up. And I was in my little childhood bed with my 80s bedspread with all these weird little colourful triangles all over it, but I couldn't see those in the monochrome of the night. And there was a crack in the doorway, and in the doorway I could see glowing red eyes. Yes, I know it's a cliche. I was 5 years old. What do you expect? But I was scared. I was terrified. And then I realized, hold on a moment. You went to bed earlier, and you're feeling scared. And those glowing eyes aren't the kind of thing that happen in reality. And then it dawned on me, this has to be a dream. And I know at this point, what you really want to hear is some kind of really deep philosophical, I went and hugged the demon kind of ending to the dream, but life isn't like that. I was 5 years old. Here's what actually happened. I realized I was dreaming, so I Spider-Man'd my way up the wall, being able to stick to the wall all across the ceiling. I loved Spider-Man at that age. Out of the window, up onto the roof of my childhood house, and then I flew around the neighborhood for a little bit until I woke up. But I was ecstatic. I was having absolute joy. I was living out my own little personal fantasies, and I'd escaped the monster. I'd done it. I'd done the thing I set out to do. And so I kept doing what I'd been doing to give me those kinds of dreams, because it worked. And I had many, many, many more lucid dreams, and my nightmares slowly faded away into a distant memory, replaced by dreams of exploring the galaxy and orbiting Earth in my little wooden spaceship. I was a child, and I used my lucid dreams in the way any child would to live out these joyous, freedom, fantasy dreams where you're a superhero and an explorer of space. And that's where my journey began, and decades passed, and now I'm an explorer of inner space, and I'm here to teach you how to do the same. The principles are the same, the wording is slightly different. Don't get distracted by the complexity. The principles are simple. We're just tailoring it to your life and your complex adult mind. If you want to learn how to lucid dream, then hit that subscribe button and try watching one of the videos on the screen right now. I'll see you there.